This is the third module in the seminar on Rosslyn Chapel and Initiatic Freemasonry. In this module, we're going to take a tour of Rosslyn Chapel. I have home videos that I have taken and other pictures I've gotten. My wife and I, on our honeymoon, were up in Edinburgh in the year 1998 or 99, and this is when we took a lot of the pictures that you'll see here. Now, Rosslyn Chapel was founded in 1446 by Sir William St. Clair, the third and last St. Clair Prince of Orkney. The intention was that it was to be a collegiate church of St. Matthew, a Catholic church. However, during the time of the Reformation, the forces led by Cromwell and so on, the church was repeatedly ransacked by Reformation Protestant forces. It was described as a, quote, house and monument of idolatry, and not a place appointed for teaching the word administration of the sacraments. So it was considered to be a place that was not proper for church services by the Protestant reformers. And Cromwell himself, when he came with armies up into Scotland, stabled his horses in the sanctuary. And a lot of it was ransacked by a Protestant mob. Now, the St. Clair family worked on restoring the chapel and the church itself after these various kinds of incursions into it, and did a beautiful job of it. But in the 1950s, there was an attempt to do away with the mold that was creeping in through a lot of the stones, and they used a mixture of magnesium fluoride, which was supposed to get rid of the mold, and in fact what it did is hasten some other kinds of destruction, and it made it much worse. And so now a full-scale restoration is being done, and the place is covered with scaffolds. So in 1997 they erected a freestanding steel structure to cover the chapel and dry the stone so that the previous restoration errors could be corrected. And at this point, they're in fact seeking donations and other things to help preserve this marvelous building that has so much important history with it. This is a picture of the best restored parts of the outer chapel. However, you can see where the magnesium fluoride has discolored it, and it needs to be dried further. But there is a beautiful sculpture, Gothic sculpture, all the way around. Now, Rosslyn Chapel, in its before it was in need of so much restoration, as you see, is a Gothic structure with flying buttresses, and was beautifully sketched in earlier years, a couple of centuries ago. Very ornate structure with many parts and many areas to the architecture. However, this is what it started to finally look like when it was in need of much restoration. And the result of that was the rot of the stone through mold and other things in that kind of a climate. If we take a look at it from the air, we can see what the basic design is of the chapel. We can learn a great deal more about it by going to their website, reading information. I'm not going to do the whole introduction to it. You can learn a lot more about how it was built and where it was built. But as you can see, the green turf extends very far around it, and in one direction goes to a Templar graveyard that is not too far away. Here's the scaffolding that is now there. This was in place when Willa and I visited, and it's being used to keep things dry and to helped to overcome the problems with the mold. Now, the St. Clairs, or the Sinclair clan, were not only involved very deeply with the building guilds, they were also protectors and defenders of the gypsies. The so-called gypsies began migrating to Europe from India. In the 14th century, some people say it was much earlier than that. They were itinerant entertainers. They left India because of problems that arose with a certain king. And for their own self-protection, they encouraged the fiction, the legend that grew up around them, that they were somehow from Egypt, that they were Egyptians, or gypsies, and they had initially very good reception in the Middle and so-called Romany Europe. So they were welcomed, and their philosophy and their religion and so on was at first quite well respected. But later they were expelled as spies and corruptors of the faith, and they were enslaved and murdered or otherwise persecuted. They worshipped a black Madonna, as it was called. They called it Sarah. It seems to have been the Hindu goddess Kali. They were Indians. And they had with them the Hindu philosophy and teachings and religion, and much of the philosophy that would be very coherent with what had been understood by the Templars. Templar religion as it had developed, although we don't really have any real windows into it because it was kept secret for so long, but did come from the Middle East and probably had a great deal of contact with Hindu and Vedic thought. Now, the Templars themselves brought the first Black Madonna statues back from Ethiopia. And from there, these statues spread all over Europe and were associated with the Virgin Mary or with Mary Magdalene. And the Templars had a great deal of sympathy for the Romany gypsies, after their own persecution for heresy, and they must have had a great deal in common spiritually. In any case, the Sinclair family, the St. Clairs, who built Rosslyn Chapel, had a close association with the gypsies in Scotland, and they became the protectors of the gypsies as royal families. And so you will find in the museum of Rosslyn Chapel a great collection of gypsy artifacts and gypsy lore and drawings and other things that show the association that the founders of the chapel had with the gypsies. The gypsies apparently arrived in Scotland in about the 15th century, which was just before Rosslyn Chapel was built. The Sinclair clan, protected them at Rosslyn and in the territories around Rosslyn, protected them from persecution, religious persecution, or political persecution. And apparently there was a lot of give and take between them. This, as I say, indicates Templar respect for Hindu religion and their mysteries and their philosophy, and that gives us some little insight into what the Templar form of Christianity, a sort of a theosophical Christianity, might have been like. Finally, in the 16th century, about a century after the Templars and Scottish nobles who had come from Templar families and the Sinclair clan themselves had given their own private protection to the gypsies, the Romany were finally given Scottish state protection in the 16th century. That would be about the 1500s. And so Scotland, which was really the Templar land, it was the only country that really offered formal protection to the Romany gypsies. They were persecuted in most other places. This is a photograph of the Black Madonna of La Salvetat. It was a traditional stop for all pilgrims traveling from Arles to Saint-Jacques, and there were literally got to be thousands of these all around. They were associated with what the Protestants called Mariolatry, the worship of Mary, or what to the Catholics was the cult of the Virgin Mary, or the cult of Mary Magdalene. And in the legends that went along with the old Merovingian dynasty, who claimed descent from an offspring of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, it was also often thought to represent Mary Magdalene and Jesus, the hidden secret mother of the offspring of Jesus, rather, not Mary Magdalene and Jesus, but Mary Magdalene and the child or offspring of Jesus. And that child, of course, was claimed by the Merovingians to be the founder of their dynasty in Gaul, which would be rather impossible, since their dynasty didn't begin for 300 or 400 years after the time of Jesus and so on. But anyway, it was part of popular legend. People are still fascinated with this kind of stuff. If you're interested in this sort of thing, you should take the seminar I have on Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Mary. Now, if we look at Clan Sinclair, today the man who carries it on is Malcolm, Earl of Caithness. And here's a photograph of him in Scotland, taken in Scotland. This man is a gentleman and a scholar, and he is the head of renewed Templar orders and Templar Masonic orders. Andrew Sinclair is quite a deep scholar of the family, and he's written some books I think you would find interesting. One is called The Sword and the Grail. He calls it the story of the Grail, the Templars and the true discovery of America. There is some evidence in the carvings on the wall of Rosslyn Chapel that somebody who was in connection with their ancestors had been to America, because there are carvings of corn, maize, which was not known in Europe, on the wall before the time of Christopher Columbus and so on. He wrote another one called The Secret Scroll. This deals with a very interesting artifact. It's called the Kirkwall Scroll. It's kept in the Mother Lodge, Kilwinning Lodge in Scotland. And these are things that are laid down on the floor with covered with Masonic symbols that are used for Masonic initiations and rituals. And there's a very rich life of symbolry, symbolic life and allegorical symbols and so on these. And I'm showing you some pictures more closely up. These look very much like what you will see in later speculative Freemasonry. Used these kinds of floors and carpets in their initiation. And so this is probably the oldest and earliest one in Scotland. These are some of the symbols you will find on it. I'm going to give you a video tour of Rosslyn Chapel. We're going to look first at the museum, which contains a great deal of information and artifacts concerning the Gypsy. Now, here is a video tour of the chapel itself. Much more can be learned online at the site of Rosslyn Chapel and on the many different places that have commented on Rosslyn Chapel. But these are my own videos that I took, and so therefore they are under my own copyright. Well, here is a video tour of the chapel. This is the end of the third module. In the fourth module, we're going to look at the development of what we call Freemasonry today, known as speculative Freemasonry, and how it carried forward from the roots that were laid down earlier through the Templars, the Companions, and the connections that existed, the more esoteric connections that existed between these groups.